بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى صحبه وسلم. Welcome back, sisters. Welcome to our second segment on understanding grief and depression. Today we take a look at depression, the symptoms, the causes, and its causes. So the author mentioned, from daily observations in the clinical practice, it is observed that depressed people always experience a feeling of severe grief or despair accompanied by attacks of weeping. They tend to lose interest in food, showing less interest in any activity. They can also become compulsive eaters as well. Therefore, a depressed person becomes less productive, concentrates less, and starts to develop signs of forgetfulness. He may consider this life worthless and may even regard himself insignificant and worthless. He may wish for death and contemplate suicide. Depression is bound to cause disturbances in sleep and loss of weight. A woman's menstruation may cease, and a man may become impotent consequently. A depressed person may also complain of various physical symptoms for which no organic cause may be found. He or she may also hear strange voices of people blaming and reproaching him or her. So he or she blames themselves, feeling guilty for any trivial things that he or she had previously done. This also may cause him or her to give up work. And of course, this is in some cases. The patient cannot determine the source of these voices, called hallucinations, as depressed people rarely experience them. Again, depressed people rarely experience them. It is worth noting here that being guilt-stricken is a commendable act if it leads one to be more productive, repentant, and improved. If this feeling of guilt, however, causes frustration, impeding productivity, then it must be one of the symptoms of depression, as has already been mentioned. The depressed person may sometimes attempt to kill others because of the depression itself, but this act of killing differs from other acts of killing in that he or she believes that what he or she has done is in fact good for his or her victim, who always turns out to be his wife or the children. An example of this has been reported in some newspapers under the title, "Do Not Read This." The report mentions that a man killed his 5 children, his wife, and then killed himself. Of course, this seldom occurs. It's always triggered by a sense of despair and hopelessness experienced by the depressed person, who believes that by committing suicide and or killing others, he or she intends to relieve them and himself of the miserable lives that they lead. But when such incidents occur, the killer usually suffers from a case of severe depression and may have said to him or herself before committing such a heinous crime, "This life is absolutely worthless and harmful, and we do not deserve to live for this. I'm going to kill my wife and children because I do not want them to live this miserable life." So again, this is not something that is that's often. We know that this is something that is rare, but it does happen. Let's now look at the causes of depression. The symptoms have both external and internal causes. So the author deals with the external causes first. He says these include the following. First, we have the natural causes, like happenings in the world, events that happen in the world. An example of this is the loss of a loved one or one's cherished social status or property. Under such circumstances, the bereaved undergoes certain phases in reaction to such a loss. And these phases include the following. The first phase. This is the phase of denial and disbelief. The victim does not believe what has happened and says, I don't believe what you are saying, and I don't believe that would ever happen. Go find out for yourselves. By saying this, he is, in fact, merely trying to make the calamity seem less real. The second phase. This is the phase of oblivion and insensitivity. One may have noticed that some people show no feelings of grief at all at the loss of a relative, for instance. This phase, however, does not usually last more than 2 weeks. The third phase. This phase is characterized by attacks of weeping, extreme grief, and also by loss of appetite, sex drive, and includes to a lesser degree the other symptoms of depression previously mentioned. The fourth phase. During this phase, the victim accepts the hard facts, surrenders to reality, and resumes his worldly activities. All these phases together, however, do not last more than 6 months. This period, however, differs from one society to another. But as the author stated, it does not last more than 6 months. But let's do keep in mind that it may vary. An example of depression is one of someone who has lost a loved one since a year or two. Whenever he or she remembers him or her, then he or she becomes emotionally disturbed and starts weeping. This condition may become so difficult for him or her to bear that he or she might eventually give up her job, and withdraw from social life. So the symptoms of depression are clear in this case. If one, however, weeps upon remembering a sad event while at the same time conducting his or her daily life in a normal manner, this is not classified as a case of depression. So let's just keep that in mind. It doesn't always have to be depression if one finds oneself weeping at the memory of the loss of a loved one. How about medications? Studies and experiments have proved that some medications cause chemical changes in the brain, which in turn cause side effects, including depression. These medications are used for blood pressure, heart failure, and rheumatism. Again, some of these medications are used for blood pressure, heart failure, and rheumatism. Drugs. Some drugs or narcotics cause depression when taken, and some cause it when one ceases taking them. Alcohol is closely connected to depression as well as committing suicide. These also include stimulants, which are used by some youth or taxi drivers to increase their mental alertness while driving nonstop for a long time, or truck drivers who are driving for long periods of time. Stimulants generally contain the amphetamines, which trigger feelings of sadness and anxiety when the addict stops taking them. So he or she takes drugs to keep these feelings at bay and therefore remains caught up in a vicious cycle. So it should be mentioned, a series of drugs which stimulate the central nervous system temporarily reduce fatigue, lessen appetite, and produce a sensation of well-being. These drugs have been virtually abandoned now, as they are mildly but definitely habit-forming and because of the risk of addiction. So they are obtainable by prescription only. And almost only remaining medical uses of amphetamines are in the treatment of barbiturate poisoning and in some mental diseases. Excess of amphetamines leads to excitement, tremor, euphoria, and dilated pupils, progressing with larger doses to anxiety, hallucinations, and uncontrolled movements. Let's now turn to some the internal causes. Then these are essentially related to heredity, the internal organic structure of the brain cells, or the internal organic diseases in the human body, And the author included the following: hereditary factors. Medical studies have confirmed that some people have a predisposition to depression attacks, while others may only have some of their relatives suffering from depression. Organic diseases, an example of which is a deficiency in the thyroid gland hormones, which is obviously causes depression. Deficiency in vitamins like vitamin B12, for instance, is also bound to lead to depression. And I would like to also include here that the studies are now showing that a deficiency in vitamin D3 is a cause of depression as well. This is something that's being talked about now, which is why when we're out in the sun, when we're getting more sun, we feel so much better. So please keep that in mind as well, supplementing with vitamin D3. And then the author included unknown reasons. One may become depressed without any apparent reason, he stated. We can therefore conclude from what has been stated above that depression is not confined to calamities and external reasons only. So the implication here is that not all the causes of depression are as yet discovered, even though earlier studies may have detected some of them. So let's just keep that in mind as well, that not all the causes of depression are yet discovered, even though earlier studies may have detected some of them. And as I just mentioned, there is a lot being spoken about now in terms of deficiency in vitamin D3. Again, deficiency in vitamin D3. And this is a very, very well known matter at this point in our times. So the author went on to say, contrary to common belief, it is not true that depression occurs as a result of any weakness in one's faith or religion. This erroneous conclusion could increase one's depression and make matters even worse when it's not necessarily true. The issue of making erroneous conclusions leads us to deal with an issue, the importance of which I have noticed during my interviews with many people suffering from depression. He went on to say this issue is a source of confusion for them, as some of them could become even more depressed when they mistakenly believe that they have done something which they believe is prohibited by their religion. This conclusion then makes their depression even worse. He went on to say that it is appropriate to mention here that, like involuntary movements, feelings, and acts, there are many things which are prohibited by one's religion. One will not be questioned about feelings of annoyance, tears, and thoughts that cross one's mind against one's will, which one cannot control. The Prophet ﷺ has said in this connection, we quote here, "Indeed, Allah has forgiven my followers for their thoughts," meaning their evil thoughts, "as long as they neither say them nor do them." Again, our Prophet ﷺ said, "Indeed, Allah has forgiven my followers for their thoughts, as long as they neither say them nor do them." And this is pertaining to evil thoughts. This hadith, by the way, was documented by Imam al-Bukhari in the book of divorce. The author said, it has also been reported that the Prophet ﷺ cried when he visited Sa'ad ibn Ubadah when the latter was ill. When those present saw him crying, they also cried. Then he said, "Did you know that Allah does not punish because of weeping or grief, but He punishes or forgives because of this?" And he pointed to his tongue. "But He punishes or forgives because of this," pointing to his tongue. This report was also documented by Imam al-Bukhari in the book of funerals. The author went on to say, therefore, one may be punished when one says something that is not pleasing to Allah. The Prophet ﷺ cried when his grandson was at his deathbed. When he was asked about this, he replied, "This is mercy which Allah has embedded in the hearts of whomever He wishes of His slaves." And this hadith was also documented by Imam al-Bukhari in the book of funerals. One, however, will be questioned about voluntary words and deeds. These include, among other things, the striking of one's face with one's hand and the tearing of the front of one's garment as a sign of mourning. Under similar circumstances, one may also express one's wish for death by saying, for instance, I wish I could die, or Allah, take away my soul. These include one's unhappiness with an objection to Allah's decree on one saying, if I had done such and such, this could not have happened, or one's wailing or attempting to or committing suicide. Textual evidence from the Quran and the prophetic traditions are many, but we shall restrict ourselves to the following. The Prophet ﷺ said, he who strikes the face, tears the front of the garment as a sign of mourning, or invokes in the manner of the people of Jahiliyyah, is not one of us. He also said, none of you should not wish for death as a result of a calamity that has befallen you. If you have to wish for death, you should say, O Allah, keep me alive as long as life is better for me, and let me die if death is better for me. This hadith was documented by Imam al-Bukhari in the Book of Patience and the Book of Invocations. Khabab radiallahu anhu said, had the Prophet ﷺ not forbidden us to wish for death, I would surely have wished for it. These traditions make it clear that it is words and deeds which matter, not mere thoughts. And as Allah Ta'ala says concerning suicide in Surah An-Nisa, verse 29, He says, وَلَا تَقَتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُمْ رَحِيمًا. And this is interpreted, and do not kill yourselves. Verily Allah is ever merciful to you. The Prophet ﷺ also said in this connection, whoever kills himself with an iron weapon will be carrying this weapon in his hand and stabbing his abdomen with it in the hellfire, wherein he will abide for all eternity. Whoever drinks poison and kills himself with it, he will be carrying his poison in his hand and drinking it in the hellfire, wherein he will abide for all eternity. And whoever purposely throws himself from a mountain and kills himself will be in the hellfire, falling down into it and abiding there in it for all eternity. And we seek refuge in Allah from that. Ameen. This hadith has been documented by Imam al-Bukhari in the Book of Medicine. The author went on to say, it is perhaps appropriate here to clarify a point of which some people may not be aware. This concerns the fact that the punishment mentioned in the aforementioned text will be exacted only on those who intentionally commit suicide while they are in full consciousness and sane in mind. Those who suffer from a case of severe depression are not considered to be legally capable in Islam because of their tendency to act irresponsibly and commit any bad deeds involuntarily. They may commit suicide, but in this case, their destiny is for Allah to decide. We do not claim that anyone who destroys himself is doomed to hell. Therefore, when a person who suffers from such severe depression comes to see us, he said, it is the psychiatrist who is responsible for treating him, and he may even force him to receive treatment simply because he is unconscious. The conscious person, however, will be held responsible for his own actions. So again, we have to keep in mind too, dear sisters, that when he's mentioning the psychiatrist, then we should be dealing with Muslim psychiatrists. We should be dealing with Muslim psychiatrists. And then he concluded by saying some people take this matter lightly, using drugs with the intention to destroy themselves. And if such an attempt is successful, they die as those who have actually committed suicide. Again, he says some people take this matter lightly, using drugs with the intention to destroy themselves. And if such an attempt is successful, they die as those who have actually committed suicide. He concludes by saying we seek Allah's refuge from such actions. So this concludes the discussion today regarding understanding grief and depression, and this chapter on depression, the symptoms of depression. So I say to my sisters, as I conclude, don't be overwhelmed. Remember when Allah wrote the test, He wrote the date it was to begin and the date it would come to an end. He constructed the test and He constructed us to handle it. He created times of testing and times of ease. And hidden in every trial, there is a diamond that is unveiled in time. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Exalted are you, O Allah, and all praises for you. I bear witness that there is no God except you. I ask your forgiveness and I repent to you. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.